X-Men is a 2000 American superhero film based on the Marvel Comics superhero team created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. Directed by Bryan Singer from a screenplay by David Hayter and a story by Singer and Tom DeSanto, it features an ensemble cast consisting of Patrick Stewart, Hugh Jackman, Ian McKellan, Halle Berry, Famke Janssen, James Marsden, Bruce Davison, Rebecca Romijn, Ray Park, and Anna Paquin. The film depicts a world where an unknown proportion of people are mutants, possessing superhuman powers that make them distrusted by normal humans. It focuses on mutants Wolverine and Rogue as they are brought into a conflict between two groups with radically different approaches to bringing about the acceptance of mutant kind: Charles Xavier's X-Men and the Brotherhood of Mutants, led by Magneto. Welcome back to Marvel Movie Rewind, where we look back at every live-action Marvel movie. Today we are discussing X-Men. Before this movie, there was a TV movie spin-off 4 years prior in 1996, called Generation X. Marvel Comics writers-in-chief editors Gerry Conway and Roy Thomas wrote an X-Men screenplay in 1984 when Orion Pictures held an option on the film rights, but development stalled when Orion began facing financial troubles. Throughout 1989 and 1990, Stan Lee and Chris Claremont were in discussions with Carloco Pictures for an X-Men film adaptation, with James Cameron as producer and Kathryn Bigelow directing. A number of alternate screenplays were presented by various writers and ultimately dismissed. The oldest one was a 1991 screenplay called Wolverine and the X-Men. Magneto was vastly rewritten to be an anti-mutant industrialist with magnetic superpowers named Thomas Prince, who recruits Jason Wingard from the X-Men and uses him to frame them for murder. This triggers a bout of anti-mutant hysteria while Prince runs a presidential campaign, but is eventually defeated. A story treatment was written by Bigelow, with Bob Hoskins being considered for Wolverine and Angela Bassett as Storm. The deal fell apart when Stan Lee piqued Cameron's interest in a Spider-Man film. Carloco went bankrupt, and the film rights reverted to Marvel. In December 1992, Marvel discussed selling the property to Columbia Pictures to no avail. Meanwhile, Avia Rod produced the animated X-Men television series for Fox Kids. 20th Century Fox was impressed by the success of the television series, and producer Lawrence Schuller Donner purchased the film rights for the property in 1994, bringing Andrew Kevin Walker to write the script. Walker's draft involved Professor Xavier recruiting Wolverine into the X-Men, which consisted of Cyclops, Jean Grey, Iceman, Beast, and Warren Worthington III. The Brotherhood of Mutants, which consisted of Magneto, Sabretooth, Toad, Juggernaut, and the Blob, tries to conquer New York City, while Henry Peter Grinch and Boulevard Trask attack the X-Men with 3 8-foot-tall, or 2.4-meter, Sentinels. The script focused on the rivalry between Wolverine and Cyclops, as well as the latter's self-doubt as a field leader. Part of the backstory invented for Magneto made him the cause of the Chernobyl disaster. The script also featured the X-Copter in the Danger Room. Walker turned in his second draft in June 1994. It begins with the Mutant Registration Act being passed, while Sentinels are also being constructed. In response, Magneto and the Brotherhood of Mutants take over Manhattan, using their powers to shield it from the world and make it a haven for mutants. Leda Kalogridis was brought on for a subsequent rewrite in 1995. An early script kept the idea of Magneto turning Manhattan into a mutant homeland and intended to use the legacy virus to wipe out humanity, while another hinged on a romance between Wolverine and Storm. Michael Chabon had pitched a 6-page film treatment to Fox in 1996. It featured heavily on character development between Wolverine and Jubilee and included Professor X, Cyclops, Jean Grey, Nightcrawler, Beast, Iceman, and Storm. Under Chabon's plan, the villains would not have been introduced until the second film. Fox considered Brett Ratner, who would later direct X-Men: The Last Stand, as a director and offered the position to Robert Rodriguez, but he turned it down. After the commercial success of Mortal Kombat in the United States, Paul W.S. Anderson was offered the position but turned it down, wanting to shift away from making another PG-13 rated film in favor of making an R-rated horror film, Event Horizon. Following the release of The Usual Suspects, Bryan Singer was looking to do a science fiction film, and Fox offered him Alien Resurrection, but producer Tom DeSanto felt he would be more appropriate for X-Men. Singer was hesitant to direct a comic book film, but changed his mind after DeSanto presented the themes of prejudice in the comic that resonated with Singer. In August 1996, Ed Solomon began work on the script. By December 1996, Singer was in the director's position, while Solomon completed a rewrite that month. Solomon's hiring was publicly revealed in April 1997, and Singer went on to film Apt Pupil. Fox then announced a Christmas 1998 release date. John Logan and James Schamus provided script revisions, with the latter focusing solely on fleshing out the characters. In late 1997, the budget was projected at $60 million. In 1998, Claremont returned to Marvel and, seeing how Fox was still struggling with the script, sent them a 4-page long memo where he explained the core concepts and what differentiated the X-Men from other superheroes. In late 1998, Singer and DeSanto sent a treatment to Fox, which they believed was perfect because it took the themes and the intent of the Xavier and Magneto comparisons to Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, unlike the other scripts. They made Rogue an important character because Singer recognized that her mutation, which renders her unable to touch anyone, was the most symbolic of alienation. Singer merged attributes of Kitty Pryde and Jubilee into the film's depiction of Rogue. Magneto's plot to mutate the world leaders into accepting his people is reminiscent of how Constantine I's conversion to Christianity ended the persecution of early Christians in the Roman Empire. The analogy was emphasized in a deleted scene in which Storm teaches history. Senator Kelly's claim that he has a list of mutants living in the United States recalls Joseph McCarthy's similar claim regarding communists. After the disastrous reception of Batman and Robin, the release of Blade convinced some film studios that a Marvel character could carry on a movie. Fox, who had set the budget at $75 million, rejected the treatment, which they estimated would have cost $5 million more. Beast, Nightcrawler, Pyro, and the Danger Room had to be deleted before the studio greenlighted X-Men. Fox head Bill Mechanic argued that this would enhance the story, and Singer concurred that removing the Danger Room would allow him to focus on other scenes he preferred. Elements of Beast, particularly his medical expertise, were transferred to Jean Grey. In mid-1998, Singer and DeSanto brought Christopher McQuarrie from The Usual Suspects, and together they did another rewrite. McQuarrie was initially slated to work on the script for only 3 weeks, but had not yet delivered his draft by October 1998. Joss Whedon was brought in during production to rewrite the last act. Whedon was highly critical of the script and instead performed a major overhaul. Whedon's draft featured the Danger Room and concluded with Jean Grey dressed as the Phoenix. According to Entertainment Weekly, the screenplay was rejected because of its quick-witted pop culture referencing tone, and the finished film contained only 2 dialogue exchanges that Whedon had contributed. Whedon also claimed to have been invited to the table read, completely unaware that his script had been thrown out. Actor and producer David Hayter, who at the time was working as Singer's assistant, was brought in for rewrites due to his extensive knowledge of the original comics. Hayter took great pride in retaining many of the core elements from the source material, such as Wolverine's Canadian background, as the studio wanted to make him American. He received solo screenplay credit from the Writers Guild of America, while Singer and DeSanto were given story credit. The WGA offered McQuarrie a credit, but he voluntarily took his name off when the final version was more in line with Hayter's script than his. In July 2020, The Hollywood Reporter revealed that McQuarrie and Solomon both removed their names from the film due to the studio's torturous process. Solomon would later express regret about removing his name. Hayter claims that 55% of his script ended up in the finished film, while other insiders claim that the majority of what is on screen was written by McQuarrie and Solomon, with only small contributions from Hayter. Many actors were considered for playing the part of Wolverine in a film adaptation of X-Men. Viggo Mortensen was offered the role but turned it down as it conflicted with another role he was scheduled for. In 1995, Glenn Danzig was invited by Fox for the role of Wolverine, as his height and build closely resembled that of the film's protagonist, as described in the comic books. However, Danzig declined as the shooting would interfere with his band's 9-month tour. With Singer taking over as director, he spoke to a number of actors, including Russell Crowe, Keanu Reeves, and Edward Norton, for the role, with Crowe being his first choice, but he turned it down. Fox ruled out Mel Gibson as being too expensive. Dougray Scott was cast as Wolverine in a multi-film deal, but was forced to drop out due to scheduling conflicts with Mission Impossible 2 in early October 1998, and was injured in a motorbike accident, after which the role went to Hugh Jackman on Crowe's recommendation. Jackman was an unknown actor at the time, while a number of more established actors offered their services for the role. Jackman's wife, Deborah Lee Furness, told him not to do it after reading the 3 pages he was given. Jackman was initially rejected as he was deemed too tall for the role. Singer brought Viggo Mortensen to view storyboards, but Mortensen's son was vocal about the character's imposing appearance. Mortensen was also apprehensive about signing on for multiple films. Scott also said that Tom Cruise made him drop out of the role as well. Jackman was then cast 3 weeks into filming, based on a successful audition. Despite what was thought to be a highly controversial move due to his much taller stature than Wolverine's comic depictions by a full foot of height, Jackman's actual performance was well received. Wolverine's original depiction is said to be 5 foot 3 inches, or 160 centimeters, while Jackman stands at 6 foot 3 inches, or 191 centimeters. Rather than auditioning other actors, X-Men director Bryan Singer actively pursued Patrick Stewart for the role of Charles Xavier on the set of Conspiracy Theory, which was directed by X-Men executive producer Richard Donner. The success of the Star Trek The Next Generation TV and film franchises had typecast Stewart as his character, Jean-Luc Picard, and obtaining other roles became difficult. However, in the late 1990s, he accepted the role of Xavier, a role similar in many ways to Picard. He was initially reluctant to sign on to another major franchise, but his interest in working with director Bryan Singer persuaded him. While Singer worked to persuade Stewart to take the role, Others who expressed interest in the part included actor Terrence Stamp and singer Michael Jackson. Jackson actively campaigned for the role of Xavier, but was never seriously considered by the studio. Chris Potter, who voiced Gambit in the animated series, auditioned for the role of Cyclops, but Jim Caviezel secured the role, who eventually backed out due to scheduling conflicts with Frequency. James Marsden was unfamiliar with this character, but he soon became accustomed to it after reading various comic books. Marsden modeled his performance similar to a Boy Scout. Anna Paquin dropped out of the lead role in Tart in favor of X-Men. Rachel Leigh Cook was considered for the role of Rogue. Cook later admitted that she regretted her decision to turn the role down. Janet Jackson was offered the role of Storm, but she turned it down due to tour obligations. In 1998, it was rumored that Julianne Moore was in talks for the X-Men film at the time, presumably for the role of Jean Grey. Helen Hunt was offered the role, but turned it down, as did Charlize Theron. Peter Wilson auditioned for the role. Ashley Judd, Alicia Witt, Selma Blair, Robin Wright Penn, Minnie Driver, and Maria Bello were also all rumored to have been auditioning for the role at the time. Lucy Lawless was invited to audition, possibly for the role of Jean, but chose to abstain due to her real-life pregnancy and her otherwise busy schedule with Xena Warrior Princess. In early August 1999, it was rumored by Daily Variety that Dutch model-turned-actress Famke Janssen had been cast as Jean Grey. Singer cast Bruce Davison and Ian McKellan, both of whom had acted in his previous film Apt Pupil. Before Ian McKellan, Christopher Lee, Terrence Stamp, and David Hemblin, who voiced Magneto in X-Men the Animated Series, were considered for the role. Now, let's talk about the production.
Mutation. It is the key to our evolution. It has enabled us to evolve from a single-celled organism into the dominant species on the planet. This process is slow, normally taking thousands and thousands of years. But every few hundred millennia, evolution leaps forward.
The movie was produced by Marvel Entertainment Group and distributed by 20th Century Fox. It was directed by Bryan Singer. The movie was written by David Hayter. The movie was also produced by Lauren Schuller Donner, wife of Richard Donner, and Ralph Winter. The original start date for filming was mid-1999, with the release date set for Christmas 2000, but Fox moved X-Men to June. Steven Spielberg had been scheduled to film Minority Report for release in June 2000, but he had chosen to film AI Artificial Intelligence, and Fox needed a film to fill the void. This meant that Singer had to finish X-Men 6 months ahead of schedule, although filming had been pushed back. The release date was then moved to July 14th. Filming took place from September 22, 1999 to March 3, 2000 in Toronto and Hamilton, Ontario. Locations included Central Commerce Collegiate, the Distillery District, and the Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum. Casa Loma, Roy Thompson Hall, and Metro Hall were used for X-Mansion interiors, while Parkwood Estate, located in Oshawa, east of Toronto, was chosen for exteriors. Spencer Smith Hall in Burlington, Ontario doubled for Liberty Island. During production, Singer would allegedly arrive late and experience mood swings and explosive tantrums. At the time, Singer claimed to be taking medication for back pain. Cast and crew members found Singer's drug use too problematic. Kevin Feige, the film's associate producer, was flown on set to ensure that Singer was kept in line. Singer was also accused of giving small roles to younger actors and minors in exchange for sex. A source for Pyro actor Alex Burton says Burton was told the role was created for him by Singer and Mark Collins Rector. Burton was also flown from Los Angeles to Toronto for filming, an unusual occurrence for an actor with a minor role. Several sources close to The Hollywood Reporter claim that the story meetings were unprofessional, even by eccentric auteur standards, with Singer allegedly bringing young guys, who were not involved with the project, to the meetings. Singer also banned comics from the set, and Feige had to sneak them in for actors to understand their roles. The filmmakers decided not to replicate the X-Men costumes as seen in the comic book. Stan Lee and Chris Claremont supported this decision. Producer and co-writer Tom DeSanto had been supportive of using the blue and yellow color scheme of the comics, but came to conclude that they would not work on screen. To acknowledge the fan complaints, Singer added Cyclops' line, "What would you prefer, yellow spandex?" when Wolverine complains about wearing their uniforms during filming. This line was later parodied in the X-Men 97 animated series with,
"What'd you expect? Black leather?"
Singer noted that the durable black leather made more sense for the X-Men to wear as protective clothing, and Schuller Donner added that the costumes helped them blend into the night. The black leather outfits were inspired by The Matrix, as studio executives felt it would help the film's success. Oakley Inc. provided the red-lensed glasses worn by Cyclops, a customized version of the company's own X-Metal Juliet. Wolverine's claws required no cast of Hugh Jackman's hands and were built so he could easily put them on and take them off for safety reasons. Production had insisted that they be attached at all times under a full prosthetic sleeve, but designer Gordon Smith refused to do it. Production also insisted on real metal blades, which Smith also refused to do, making injection-molded plaster blades instead. Hundreds of pairs were built for Jackman and his stunt doubles. Rebecca Romijn wore 110 individual silicone prosthetics on her body to portray Mystique. Only the edges were glued, the rest were self-sticking. The prosthetics were built flat and wrapped around her body. They were internally colored with food coloring and needed additional makeup or paint. The original agreed to and tested design was to color her skin with cosmetic-grade food coloring as well, but at the last minute, Bryan Singer insisted on painting her skin to look opaque, as in the comic book, which added 6 hours to the time needed to apply Romijn's makeup, making the ordeal very difficult for her. There were also no facilities provided to exhaust paint fumes during one of Canada's coldest winters. In the late 1990s, computer-generated imagery was becoming more commonly used. Singer visited the sets of Star Wars Episode I: The Phantom Menace and Titanic to understand practical and digital effects. Filming had started without a special effects company hired. Digital Domain, SynSight, Rhythm & Hughes Studios, Hammerhead Production, Matte World Digital, Core, and Pop were all hired in December 1999. Visual effects supervisor Mike Fink admitted to being dissatisfied with his work on X-Men in 2003, despite nearly being nominated for an Academy Award. Digital Domain's technical director Shawn C. Cunningham and lead compositor Klaas Henke morphed Bruce Davison into a liquid figure for Kelly's mutation scene. They considered showing Kelly's internal organs during the transformation. Singer initially approached John Williams to compose the score, who turned down the offer because of scheduling conflicts. Later, he roped in his usual composer, John Ottman. However, once Fox pushed X-Men from December to July, Ottman's commitment to direct Urban Legend's final cut made him unable to work with Singer. Instead, Michael Kamen was commissioned to compose the film's score in February 2000. This marked the first time that a different composer produced a score for any film directed by Singer instead of Ottman. Kamen had provided his scores for various Fox projects in the past, most notably the 3 Die Hard films. As for X-Men's score, he recorded it in Los Angeles instead of London, as the producers abandoned it due to time constraints. Kamen's first draft of the score had been described as having an abundance of themes and rich orchestrations. During early recording sessions, producer Lauren Schuller Donner expressed her dissatisfaction with Kamen's music and forced him to rewrite the entire score by using fewer themes and more electronic elements. The soundtrack to the film was released by Decca Records on July 11, 2000. Cameo appearances include X-Men co-creator Stan Lee in his first theatrical Marvel movie cameo as a hot dog vendor, screenwriter David Hayter, and story writer and executive producer Tom DeSanto as police officers on Ellis Island, George Buza, the voice of Beast in X-Men the Animated Series, as the truck driver who drops off Rogue at the bar at which Wolverine fights, and Cal Dodd, voice of Wolverine in the same show, can be seen on the right-hand side of the screen as Senator Kelly exits the water. Associate producer Kevin Feige appeared as a Weapon X technician, but his cameo did not make the final cut of the film.
Hey, it's me.
Prove it.
You're a dick.
Okay.
Fox aired a special entitled Mutant Watch to promote the film that partially includes in-universe scenes of a Senate hearing featuring Senator Robert Kelly. This featurette was included as a bonus feature on some of the video releases. On June 1, 2000, Marvel published a comic book prequel to X-Men entitled X-Men Beginnings, revealing the backstories of Magneto, Rogue, and Wolverine. X-Men premiered at Ellis Island on July 12, 2000. In North America, X-Men opened on Friday, July 14, 2000, and made $21.4 million on its opening day. This made it the third highest opening day of any film, behind Star Wars Episode I: The Phantom Menace and The Lost World Jurassic Park. It also had the third highest Friday gross, just after the latter film and Toy Story 2. The film earned $57.5 million in its opening weekend, averaging $18,000 per theater, and had the highest grossing opening weekend for a superhero film, surpassing Batman Forever's $52.8 million, a non-sequel, and a July release, surpassing Men in Black's $51.1 million. At the time of its release, X-Men had the 6th biggest opening of all time and marked the first time in history that 3 pictures had consecutive opening weekends above $40 million in North America, after The Perfect Storm's $41.3 million and Scary Movie's $42.3 million. Moreover, it had the second highest opening weekend of that year, behind Mission Impossible 2. Upon its debut, the film would reach the number 1 spot at the box office. During its second weekend, the film was overtaken by What Lies Beneath, but made a total of $23.5 million. X-Men grossed $157.3 million in the United States and Canada and $139 million in other territories for a worldwide total of $296.3 million, against a production budget of $75 million, becoming the 8th highest grossing film of 2000 domestically and 9th worldwide. The success of X-Men started a re-emergence of the comic book and superhero film genre. It currently has an 82% critic score and an 83% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, a 7.3 out of 10 on IMDb, and a 64 Metacritic score. Upon release, X-Men received generally positive reviews from critics.
You actually go outside in these things? What would you prefer? Yellow spandex?
Several journalists and film critics have credited X-Men with helping reinvent the modern superhero film by revolutionizing the genre and reviving public interest in superheroes. At the time of its release, X-Men was the most critically and commercially successful comic book adaptation to not feature Batman or Superman. Den of Geeks' Don Kay and Eric Diaz of Nerdist believe that the film proved that even lesser-known comic book characters could potentially headline successful franchises. While the X-Men had already been popular among comic book readers and fans of the animated series, the film elevated its team members to mainstream popularity. Anthony Orlando of Digital Trends said the film's impact is still apparent as of 2025, having set the stage for comic book movies to dominate theaters throughout the 21st century, launching a successful franchise with its thrilling story, compelling characters, talented cast, and thought-provoking themes. Jesse Hassinger of Paste and Stacey Henley of Sci-Fi.com concurred that while many films help bring superhero movies into the mainstream, the modern lineage of the genre really begins with X-Men, which established the basic formula that contemporary successes have since borrowed from. In 2020, Hader credited the film with unleashing a legion of superhero movies upon the world, for better and for worse. According to Brandon Katz of the New York Observer, X-Men, along with Blade, helped to legitimize the genre as a bankable lane for Hollywood that could expand beyond the cartoonish sensibilities of older comic book films. Orlando and Salon's Matthew Raza credit X-Men with salvaging the superhero genre after a period of poorly received superhero films toward the end of the 1990s that soured the genre's reputation. Raza said that, before the Dark Knight trilogy, the Spider-Man trilogy, and the Marvel Cinematic Universe, X-Men proved that the genre could be profitable while lending itself to intelligent, complex stories about social and political issues, while establishing that a larger cinematic universe was possible for superhero flicks. It arguably launched Marvel's first cinematic universe. Tom Bryan of the AV Club said that while several superior superhero films have been released since X-Men, none of those later Marvel movies could exist without X-Men. Similarly, Eric Diaz of Nerdist argued that while X-Men might not be the best superhero film, it is inarguably the most important comic book superhero movie ever made because it was certainly the comic book movie that changed how the genre was perceived from that point on, and helped launch the current superhero movie golden age we live in. X-Men also inspired later comic book adaptations and superhero films to adopt a darker, more serious tone grounded in aspects of reality, both in their themes and aesthetics. Diaz noted that, unlike Superman and Batman adaptations, the film was almost completely devoid of camp or tongue-in-cheek humor. It treated its world with complete seriousness and hammered home the socio-political underpinnings of the original comic without pulling any punches. Kay acknowledged that while subsequent comic book films would learn several positive examples from X-Men, they also borrowed their fair share of wrong lessons, notably the film's aversion to the bright, colorful costumes of the comic books in favor of all-black leather. The film also influenced the careers of its principal cast, elevating several actors into box office draws and closely associating them with their roles, most notably Stewart and McKellan. Diaz theorizes that McKellan's performance inspired other serious actors of his caliber to accept superhero roles, notably Alfred Molina in the Spider-Man trilogy and Josh Brolin in the MCU. Jackman in particular rose from relative obscurity to become one of the biggest movie stars in the world. Meanwhile, Marvel Comics itself began taking advantage of Wolverine's marketability by featuring the superhero outside of the immediate X-Men comics, due in part to Jackman's popularity and longevity in the role. Justin Carter of Polygon observed that, after Jackman's success, both the MCU and DCEU would reuse the formula of using superhero movies to launch the careers of relatively unknown actors into superstardom, notably Chris Evans, Chris Hemsworth, and Gal Gadot. However, Carter noted that Jackman also suffered from typecasting for much of his post-X-Men career. There was also a comic book adaptation based on the film. A console video game, X-Men Mutant Academy, was released on July 6, 2000 to take advantage of the film's release, featuring costumes and other materials from the film. Jackman revealed in an interview with the Huffington Post that his character was originally going to have a cameo in Spider-Man, but the costume could not be obtained. Tyler Mane reprises his role as Sabretooth 24 years later, in 2024's Deadpool and Wolverine. X-Men got a sequel 3 years later in 2003, titled X2, X-Men United. With that being said, thanks for watching. Next time we'll be talking about Blade 2. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to see more, consider giving a like or rating and subscribing with notifications so you never miss an episode. It's free. Also feel free to check out our other episodes and share this podcast with others on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. We'll see you next time on Movie Rewind.